We have to get out of this whole battle of trying to say that God is Democrat, Republican, or for this nation or for that nation. The question is, are the nations for him? All right. It is the job of the church to image God in the earth. That's one of the issues in this political environment. I do feel like I need to say this, is that we want to make sure that we, again, don't tie God to a political party, because here's what I tell people. When you tie God to that political party, everything that party does wrong then reflects back to God. So now you got to make excuses for that. So if Trump is the representative of God, then we got to answer to why he got multiple wives and talk the way he talk and do all of this if he's supposed to be imaging God. All right, so and you have to be able to critique those things. And so back to this. So world systems, enemies, flesh, world systems. And when we get tied up into kingdom building in the earth, we will not build the God's kingdom. All right, we can get so comfortable in trying to be successful down here and to make a life down here. And plus, I'm not on the other extreme of don't save up nothing, don't live for nothing, be poor and miserable, don't live a monastic. You know, some people think like you ought to live a monastic life and shouldn't have anything. No. I'm just saying keep your perspective the right way. The Bible says a good man leaves an inheritance to his children's children. All right, so I want to leave something for my children, but at the same time, money can't be my main focus and my aim. God has to be. Because what will happen is if the money is the main focus and my aim, I will compromise my morality and my spirituality for the money. And so God doesn't have a problem with me having money. It's about the money having me. And what am I willing to do to get the money? Am I willing to violate a principle in God in order to get a check, to keep a position? Will I then abdicate my role as an image bearer of God? All right, so those are our enemies. But then we talked about the spiritual forces. And I'm going the securities route all long way because I got to break up some of our mindset about we think they're just these two things that are going on around. You got good angels, you got bad angels. That's what most people's mindset. We have this image of you got the good angel on one shoulder, whispering in your ear to do the right thing, and then you got the bad one, the devil on your other shoulder telling you to do the wrong thing, and we think that's the extent of the spiritual battle. I got this angel and devil on the side of me trying to talk me into doing the wrong thing. One's got wings and a harp, the other one's got a tail and a pitchfork, and it's in a red suit. And so we got to get out of that mindset. So some concepts I wanted us to understand, we talked on Sunday, is about sacred spaces. A sacred space, y'all remember it. A sacred space is where God dwells and or where God meets and interacts with his people. Based upon that broad definition of what a sacred space is, where God lives, heaven, it would be a sacred space, right? But also we found out the Garden of Eden, and we'll talk a little bit more about the garden today, was a sacred space because that's what God made man, all right? We find out even that the promised land that the children of Israel entered into was a sacred space, an inheritance that God had for his people. But here's one that we better catch. You're a sacred space. Because you are the temple of the living God. God lives in you. That makes you holy. That's why the Bible calls us holy. That's what makes the difference between us and unbelievers. It ain't that I'm so special that I don't mess up, that I don't do wrong sometimes. I'm not called holy because I'm perfect. I still act up. I still mess up. What makes me holy is God in me. All right? And the same thing for everyone who calls upon the name of the Lord. When I talked about Eden, it was an important concept to understand about Eden, that Eden, while it may have been on the earth, it was separate from the earth. Now, its physical location, someone asked me about afterwards that said, is Eden on another planet, all that. I don't know where Eden at. I just know we can't get there. Let's say that. And if you should happen to get there, there's going to be this cherubim with a flaming sword going in all directions, ready to cut you to pieces, stopping you from getting there. So you don't want to go there no way. Not right now, all right, because we cut out of there. But it was different than the rest of the earth. That if you looked at God's creation in the earth, is where God put man in the garden, but then told man to go out into the earth to fill it and to subdue it. Garden of Eden was interesting because man, whose primary domain is in the physical realm, even though we are also spiritual beings. That's important. Our primary realm is in the physical, but we are also spiritual. So therefore, because we are also spiritual, we can interact with the spiritual. Angels and other spiritual beings we're going to talk about, they are primary spiritual beings. They inhabit the spirit realm. That's where they live at, but they can still interact in the physical. Right, the only ones that are a little bit different are demons, disembodied spirits, and we'll talk more about them as we go forward, because they cannot interact in this physical realm unless they possess a physical body. Angels are able to manifest in the physical realm, to show up, to have a physical body. Other spiritual beings, they're able to manifest and have a physical body. Demons are different. That's why you see when Jesus cast those demons out of the legion, out of the possessed man, they begged him not to send him into the abyss, but to cast us into. So he cast them into swine, because for them to exist and to operate in this realm, they need a physical form. They don't have the ability to manifest, and that's contingent upon the fall, and we'll talk about that in weeks to come. Now, I'm going to do this throughout this teaching. I'll throw out something and tell you I'm going to explain it later. That's going to keep you coming back week after week after week. You can write it down and research it on your own. But I'll tell you, I've been enjoying this, but man, it's been keeping me up late at night and keep me going and studying this stuff. And I like it because after years in the Bible, it's like I'm studying stuff all over anew again. And so there's this excitement for me and, concepts that just, that I had to peel away what I thought I understood. Then the reality is some of the stuff I just didn't get into. It was spooky, and it's like, I don't need to. When I die, I'm going to heaven. I don't need to know all the details about how it's going to happen. That's the way we kind of told ourselves, because it was kind of hard to conceptualize it. So now, I'm seeing now through this study how important it is to know how to know these things, because it helps me to understand the plan of redemption and our role in the earth. So it was from Eden where God had placed man, gave us dominion over the earth, and told us to go out and to subdue the earth and to rule it. We fail because of our sin. Remember, I told you two things lead us into sin: deception and disobedience. All right. Sometimes we sin because we've been deceived. Sometimes we haven't been deceived. We just doing wrong because we want to. All right. And so those two things lead us into sin. And ever since the fall, the whole Bible is about God trying to get us back to the original design. That's why it's so important we had to keep going back to Genesis and understanding what went on in the Bible, because all of this, matter of fact, when you get to the end of Revelation, it's about getting back to Eden. We're talking about getting to heaven. No, God's bringing heaven on earth. We will reign with him in the earth. He's creating a new heaven and a new earth, and we will be in the earth. And so this was always supposed to be our area of domain and rule, and ultimately God is going to restore that fully to us. On Sunday we saw this one character in the Bible that showed up who called himself the captain of the Lord's host. And seeing this figure, this theophany, a theophany is the appearance of a spiritual being in the Old Testament. Many theophany are Christophanies, or Christophanies is the way they say it in theology, meaning that it was actually the pre-incarnate Christ. And it is believed that this individual we saw in Joshua was the pre-incarnate Christ. There are some details in the text that lends to that. There's others like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the fiery furnace. It is believed that that was Christ in the fire with them. Daniel in the lion's den. It was believed that that was actually pre-incarnate Christ in there with him. Some of the clues that we talked about, that while this angel seemed to be different than others, is, for one, he had no problem receiving worship. All right, when Joshua falls down and calls him to my Lord, and what would you have your servant to do? When this being tells him, see, I have given Jericho into your hands, meaning that I'm giving you power to take this up. Those are terminologies and things that seems like this spiritual being has a little more juice than a regular angel. There's something else going on with these. And then the big one is that I am captain of the Lord's host. I'm in charge of the Lord's host. And so that's where I'm going to park at today, is this heavenly host, and determine what is the heavenly host. Who are in the heavenly host? And what does it mean? There are synonymous terms. You can write this down. And as I get a little faster at this, a little better, I might get y'all a PowerPoint in advance and have that for you. But y'all going to have to write now. So heavenly host, terms synonymous with it: divine counsel. Divine counsel. Sons of God. Rulers and authorities. we can see from these terminology that are all found in the Bible, and I'm going to take it to those in a minute, that divine counsel gives an indication that this is someone. What does counsel mean? I have an elder's council here. It's a counsel do. There are counsel that you go to and you receive counsel. The divine counsel, let's cut it short. Their responsibility is to help God govern and rule the world. That's what they do. They help govern and rule the world. God could do it all by himself, but he chooses to do it in committee. God doesn't need you or me to save nobody, but he chooses to use us in evangelism. Right? It doesn't mean that God needs us to do it, but it is his choice that his creation is cooperative with him in his purpose. God doesn't need us to rule the earth, but he has given us dominion and rule over the earth. And the same way, there are these spiritual beings that are with God in this divine council, also called sons of God, rulers and authorities, all right, in this spiritual realm. There is a term in the Bible for God that I think well, I have found out, now that I think through this study, I have found out it's misinterpreted in some of our Bible verses, and meaning is obscured in it, and the term is Elohim. Elohim. Many of us have heard the term Elohim is a term for God, is a Hebrew word for God, where it is not. We think God, when we hear Elohim, we think G-O-D, God, the creator, sustainer of the universe. But Elohim is bigger than that, because in the Bible, Yahweh, yes, God is called Elohim, but also members of his divine council are called Elohim in Psalm 82. We're going to go there in a moment. Gods or goddesses that are over other nations, gods that we would call idol gods, are also called Elohim. Demons, the Shadim, are in Deuteronomy 32, are called Elohim. Even when the witch of Endor brought Samuel back to life, and he came, he is called in the Hebrew Elohim at that point when she brings him back from the dead. And angels in the Bible are also referred to as Elohim. That when you look at what do all of those individuals have in common, there's something they all have in common. They're all spiritual beings. Even Samuel at this point, because he's dead, he didn't have a body. Right? And so they all reside in the spirit realm. Their primary place of abode is the spirit realm. Now, God is called the El Elyon, or the Most High God, or the Most High Elohim, that he's different than all the other Elohim, that he is above them. He created the other Elohim and he rules over them, but the term Elohim simply represents or means those that inhabit a spiritual realm. Why that's important, so that we know that there's more than angels and demons in this spiritual realm. And then when we look at certain texts, like in Psalms 82, which we'll come to, we're going to see this divine counsel that are more than angels, but spiritual beings with certain power and authority. All right. Genesis 1, I'm about to ask you a question. I'm going to give you a chance to answer, so y'all put your thinking caps on. It's not stump the chump question, but let's see. I want to get you thinking and talking back with me. I want the Wednesday to be different than Sunday. Genesis 1, the Bible tells us in verse 26, says, "Then God said, let us make man in our image after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over the livestock, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth." Verse 27, so God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. Here's the question. You've been in Sunday school and in church. What does it mean to be made in the image of God? What is that? That I'm made in the image of God. Does God have 2 hands and 2 feet? Is it talking physical appearance? What does it mean to be made in the image of God? Oh, I don't know how we're gonna do that, but we got mics. Yeah. Oh, let's just talk. Just stand and talk. I'm getting the mics. I'm like, we can't pass mics in Corona. Yeah. Go ahead, Andre. Okay, what do you mean? So you mean that every human being has the Spirit of God in them? Oh. So are you saying then that only believers are made in the image of God now? Okay, yeah. So I'm not talking about, well, but I still want to try to get a question to the image of God, though. So my question is, what does it mean to have the image of God? Yes, I agree with you. There's people that don't have the Spirit of God in them. Only believers have the Spirit of God in them. But my question is, so then if you're saying that way, and if the image of God is the Spirit of God in man, then that would mean that every person is not made in the image of God. And are you saying that? Okay. I mean, 'cause, there's some people theology might agree with you. Okay. I'm just getting. I don't want. I want to let people say. Go ahead, shout out, and then we're gonna come over here. Yes, ma'am. Okay. So reason, creative thought, um, are what makes us different here. Oh. Yeah. So okay. Anybody else though? But I want to get some answers. I want to get some more answers out here before I shut it. I shut it down with. Go ahead. Okay. All right. Because this is an important question. Let me tell you another couple reasons why it's important. One is that the whole, like the pro-life perspective is based upon why life is sacred. Why is human life sacred? Why can we test on animals and stuff like that, but we don't test on people? You know, if an animal is sick, you put a horse sick, you put the horse down. But people sick, you don't shoot them in the head like, oh, grandpa's sick, go shoot him down, put him out of his misery. Right. There's a reason why we don't do that. A matter of fact, even if you have a child that's born deformed, we still consider that child precious, right? But if you had a puppy in a litter and that puppy was born deformed, they would euthanize it, right? But there's a reason why we believe that you don't do that to humans, and it's genuinely that we are made in the image of God, and therefore human life is sacred. People don't say all life is sacred unless you're with PETA and that kind of thing, and some people like animals more than they like people. But in general, we say to people, now here's what you hear theologically, and you kind of hit it, that if you read a lot of your commentaries and you hear what you've been taught, they'll tell you intelligence, reasoning, emotions, are the language and communication, having a spirit or a soul, are things, but those are things that are common with animals. They did a test and found out that chickens are smarter than babies. Like the example Michael Heiser uses in his book, he says, because he said he actually had a chicken, and in the morning they would let their chicken out, and at night the chicken will go back into the coop at night. Open your door and let your baby out and see if it comes back at night. Right? So at that point in time, the chicken is showing more intelligence than the baby. My dog, he was pretty much housebroke in about a month or two. How long did it take for your child to get housebroke or potty trained? right? Some are still working on that, right? To get them there. And so if intelligence is that is a scale that's sliding. Some people are less intelligent than other people, and so then as I get more intelligent, do I have more of the Spirit of God, or am I more in the image of God, or am I less in the image of God? And so those terms become problematic. And the important thing, the reason about that, why it's important to note that, because if you're debating with someone who's atheist, and we kind of present those things, and they come back with those arguments, we don't have anything to say, really. We try to tie the image of God to ability, something that we're able to do. Where God doesn't really tie it to that. Image to God is about status. Now, the way he said it, it's kind of interesting in what you said, but I can get that. It's about status. It's one of those things like, I'm holy, interestingly enough, not because I'm so good. But why am I holy? Because he declared I am. So God simply says that you are, and that makes you that way. God declares you a saint, and you are. And you can look at some people now. It's an interesting concept that there are some believers who struggle in areas that unbelievers don't struggle in. But that believer is going to go to heaven, even though that unbeliever might be living what we would say is a more moral life. Right? And are looking in judgment. But the difference is one has a different status with God. And so the same thing is that we are God's representation in the earth. And so what was supposed to happen, that word image of God is supposed to be mirror or mirage. It's like mirror or mirage. And the deeper theological understanding is that when the rest of creation sees us, it sees an image, it sees God, it sees authority, right? Because God decreed it and declared it in such a way. Now, even though God declared that we're made in his image, we don't live up to it. The Bible says all have sinned, Romans 3:23, and fallen short of the glory of God, glory or image of God. That's we've fallen short. Sin caused that to happen. Redemption is about getting back to that so we can properly image God in the earth. So this whole thing of imaging God and being Christ-like, think about it. Why do I pray in Jesus' name? It's not that I'm saying abracadabra, but what it means is that I'm praying in Jesus as if I was Jesus. So then when I pray, God sees me through Christ's sacrifice on Calvary. He sees me in Christ's perfection, because if you see me in car status, I'm not going to get what I asked for probably, because car got issues. Car's messed up. But when God sees me, and so the same thing now, when I cast out demons in Jesus' name. What gives me the ability to do that? Not because Jesus' name is abracadabra, but because I represent Christ. And it's the authority of Christ on my life that now demands those demons go. So they're not responding to me, but they're responding to the image of God on me. Y'all hear that? Y'all got that? So it is about status more so than ability, because all of those other quantitative qualities they're on a sliding scale. Everybody ain't as smart. Everybody don't emote as well. Everybody doesn't have the same level of intelligence, even the same level of self-awareness. Women are much more self-aware than men are. Believe me, you ask a man what he's thinking. He don't even know what he's thinking. Don't ask us what we're thinking. Ask me how I feel. We get confused with that. We don't feel. I don't know how I'm feeling. Right? We lack a certain amount of even self-awareness and some of those things. Yes, we're conscious, but we lack some of that. Now, some people use the idea of free will only, that we have free will, and others operate based upon instinct only. And I say that sounds nice, but it's not true, because anybody that has an animal or a pet, you start realizing how much them animals don't operate completely on instinct. Right, they seem to have all of us, I think humans operate to a certain level of instinct, but my dog makes some choices. Anybody got a pet and your pet's making choices? And then sometimes, like, my dog will see me getting ready and getting dressed and know he's about to get put in the cage, and then he'll try to go outside or do something else or move around. And then they tell you, like, when you housebreaking them, don't whip them when they make an accident in the house because they don't know what they did wrong. My dog will mess in the house. I look at the mess and I look at him, and he immediately do like this. You know you did something wrong. That dog is smarter than we give him credit for. in there. But no, they don't have the same ability that we do. All right. Here's some things about the image of God I want us to know. That first of all, both men and women are equally created in the image of God. No, in the text, let us make man in our image and in our likeness. And so God created man in his own image. In his image, God, he created him male and female. He created them. That's 127. All right. So there is no difference in it's not like man is more in the image of God than women. Yes, ma'am. Okay. Yes. But are they, so in the image of God, in the essence that we are in the image of God, but are they displaying the image of God? Are they displaying the glory of God? The answer would be no. All right. It is God's desire that all of us be representatives of him in the earth, even the lost and the fallen. So I like something Michael Heiser does, and I guess to do this. He likes to call us imagers instead of saying as in a verb. He likes to make it a verb, that either you're actively doing it or you're not actively doing it. And all of us have the potential to actively be doing it, be representing him in the earth. All right, he at work or something? Oh, he at home watches? Hey, Joe. All right, okay. Where was I at? So divine image bearing is what makes human distinct. Let me just read this from the rest of the earthly creation, plants and animals. The text in Genesis 1:26 does not inform us that the divine image bearing makes us distinct from heavenly beings, those sons of God who were already in existence at the time of creation. There is something about the image that makes humankind like God in some way. All right? There is nothing in the text that suggests, this is just I'm quoting from Michael's book, that the image has been or can be bestowed incrementally or partially. You are either created as God's image bearer or you are not. One cannot speak of being partially or potentially bearing of God's image. God alone created humankind to function as his administrators on the earth. And this is the point I'm trying to work, is that we are to be God's administrators on the earth. These angelic beings that we're talking about are his administrators in the heavens. And so with part of that, as I talk about this divine counsel, in a way, we are somewhat of his human divine counsel. Right? But let's break down this divine counsel and look time out. Oh, Lord. Go to Psalms 82 because I promised we would go there. And I want to show, first of all, how, so if you are reading Psalms 82 from, say, the King James or even the New American Standard, it's going to read differently than the one that I'm going to read for you. I'm going to read from the ESV, and I'm going to read from the New Living Translated, and I'm going to tell you why there's a difference in the translation. So Psalms 82, verse 1 says, God has taken his place in the divine council. In the midst of the gods, he holds judgment. Now, let me pause there. In the NSB and King James, it says, well, NSB says it this way: God takes his stand in his own congregation, and he judges in the midst of the rulers. Now, note the difference. Where the ESV said divine council, the NASB says congregation. Where the ESV says in the midst of the gods with a little g, the NASB says the rulers. Some have interpreted that Psalms 82, that he's talking about earthly men, primarily the children of Israel. But when you go to the Hebrew, you're going to see that's not possible, because the same word Elohim I told you at the beginning, where it starts in verse 1 where it says God has taken his place in the divine council, that word right there, God, in the Hebrew is Elohim. Well, it's the same Elohim when it says in the midst of the gods. It's just a plural form of the word Elohim. But other versions took that, instead of saying God, they changed it to rulers. Some of it is to help people feel more comfortable in that if you read this, you may start thinking okay, wait a minute, is God in the midst of a pantheon of gods? Is there a hierarchy of gods? Is this like the Egyptian gods, and he's like Zeus, and these other ones are gods? And I told you, the reason why I broke down the word Elohim in the beginning is because what we see when we see the word Elohim and God in that sense, we think of a divine being with a certain set of characteristics. Omnipresent, omnipotent, omniscient, meaning all powerful, all seeing, all knowing, everywhere at the same time. But in the text, the word Elohim, as I told you, does not mean a set of attributes in that way. It's talking about spiritual beings, those who make their abode in the spiritual realm. But when you dumb the text down, then people make improper interpretation. Let's go on in this Psalms here. He says, how long will you judge unjustly and show partiality to the wicked, Selah? Give justice to the weak and to the fatherless, maintaining the right of the afflicted and the destitute. Rescue the weak and the needy. Deliver them from the hand of the wicked. They have neither knowledge nor understanding. They walk about in darkness. All the foundations of the earth are shaken. I said, you are gods, Elohim again, sons of the Most High. Remember I told you these are terms, again, divine counsel, sons of God, also terms for this divine counsel. Verse 7, nevertheless, like men you shall die and fall like any prince. Arise, O God, judge the earth, for you shall inherit the nations. So a couple of things. The ESV and New Living versions of the Bible are interpreted from the Dead Sea Scrolls. The Dead Sea Scrolls when they found these Dead Sea Scrolls, these old ancient texts, the oldest version of the Bible we have, it was a great discovery in theology because it is some of the oldest writings and it confirmed many things. And the Hebrew in it was clearer in the sense that some of the interpretations that we have, say in King James, other older versions, maybe have a word or two off because it comes from newer manuscripts. Let me see if we can understand this. We have no original versions of the Bible, of the original text. There's no original version of the Gospel of John you can find anywhere. We have copies of copies. And of course, when you have a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy, that you will find that there can be little differences in the writing and some grammatical errors that go on between the translations. So what's considered more reliable, of course, is a copy that is closer to the date of the original. So if I have a copy that is closer to the date that the original is written, I take that copy over the other. The other way that we look at what is right in the text is, let's say you have 30 copies of a particular book of the Bible, and 29 of the copies all say one thing, but then one other copy say something different. Then you can pretty much assume then that one other copy is probably wrong. But these 29 that all say the same thing are more correct. And so when they found these old writings, and they found thousands of writings, that it gave them multiple copies of different books of the Bible, it helped to really show that the Bible has been properly preserved. But there are some nuances in this text, and particularly this text 82 is one where the Hebrew in that Elohim is changed in there, that this is talking about a divine counsel, and it's important because this is God's spiritual counsel that's helping him rule in the heavens. Deuteronomy 32 helps to explain this counsel and to a certain extent. It will help me and I hope it helps you. Let's go to Deuteronomy 32 verses 8 and 9. It says, when the Most High gave the nations their inheritance, when he divided mankind, he fixed the borders of the people according to the number of the sons of God. But the Lord's portion is his people, Jacob, his allotted heritage. Now you said you just read something, understanding. What is something about? Listen, he says, when God divided mankind, he divided mankind. When did this happen? When did God divide mankind? And it says, at some point in history, Deuteronomy is saying that God divided mankind. And when he divided them, he did it according to the numbers of the sons of God. So this is saying at some point, God divided mankind, and when he divided them, he did it based upon the sons of God or his divine counsel. And each member of that divine counsel then leads one of those divided groups of mankind. Y'all know when mankind was divided, right? Come on, y'all. One word. Who? Babel. There we go. Somebody said it. Tower of Babel. Oh, then I got to write the morning all the way back in the back. There we go, the youngster. Back at the Tower of Babel, God divides mankind. All right. There are, in Genesis, 3 falls, not just one. Usually when we talk about the fall of man, we always go back to the garden. That's one fall, where you have mankind falling and gets kicked out of the garden. The second fall is in Genesis 6. And the fall in Genesis 6 is actually a fall from the divine realm. In Genesis 6, and I'm going to read, look at the clock, verses 1 through 8. When man began to multiply on the face of the land and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were attractive, and they took as their wives as they chose. Then the Lord said, my spirit shall not abide in man forever, for he is flesh, and his days shall be 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and afterwards, when the sons of God came in to the daughters of man, they bore children to them. These were the mighty men who were of old, men of renown. The Lord saw the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and every intention of the thoughts of the heart was only evil continually. Let me pause there. Most of us know this story of, and people say they're angels, but the text doesn't call them angels, it calls them sons of God, who at some point look down and see women and say, they fine. And they want to marry them, and they marry and interbreed with women and create what are called Nephilim, giants. Now, here's the thing, Genesis makes this statement and then doesn't give us any great explanation about who this is. And I didn't bring a towel up for my sweat, huh? They don't bring any information about any more information about this. And so a lot of people, we go past it and we have speculation, but there are other books, thank you, that were widely written and read during that time that give further information about it. Most of us preachers don't want to teach from it because the books are not considered canon. Books like the book of Enoch. So the book of Enoch gives a detailed explanation of this fall of a particular group of let's say angelic or spiritual beings called watchers, who had a responsibility to watch over humankind, but they left their estate and chose to intermingle and marry with women. If you go on in the book of, in the book of Enoch, it even tells you that they began to teach things to mankind that they were not supposed to. Teach men how to make weapons of war and basically allow men to sin better. You think about this, as technology comes on and we get more technology, what do we end up doing better is sinning better. We learn how to kill people more efficiently and more in mass and this kind of thing. And that these abilities were taught to men from these fallen beings. Now, the book of Enoch, I believe it has validity in its reading. Why? Because 3 different books of the Bible quote the book of Enoch. And so it's interesting to me that if Peter and Jude and John will quote Enoch, then it seems it would be important for me to read it. The Second Temple Jews, that's that period of time between the fall of the temple in Babylon and Christ's second coming. They're called Second Temple Jews. Is a period called the intertestamental period, some people call it. The time between when the prophets stop speaking and Jesus comes again, that silent period in there. Well, there are a lot of writings that come out of that time that the Jews during that time read it and widely distributed it, and the book of Enoch was one of them. And that generation of people, when they're reading this text, they're armed with that information. And so the writer of Genesis, Deuteronomy, the Psalms, doesn't go into more explanation on those because, remember, I told you the Bible is written for us but not to us. It was written to a people who knew who the Nephilim were. It was written to a people through other writings understood that whole fall. So what we have happening in Genesis 6, that there is this fall now from the divine realm. Man, we see in Genesis and Eden, we see a fall of man, but not only do we see a fall of man in Genesis 3, because I will argue that the serpent in Genesis 3 is not an actual snake. It is also a spiritual being that is tempting man. Some will say that it was Satan himself. And so we see in there a fall from an angelic or spiritual being and man. We see another fall in Genesis 6 of spiritual beings that then contaminate mankind. And then Genesis 11 is the third fall. And that's the Tower of Babel that you guys mentioned. Let me go quickly read Genesis 11. I'm trying to stick to my time, so I'm going to go quickly. You read Genesis 11, verses 1 through 9. But the point that I want to point out is that what happened is that man, well, I'm going to read it. Man, now the whole earth had one language in the same words. And as people migrated from the east, they found a plain in the land of Shinar and settled there. And they said to one another, come, let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly. And they had brick for stone and bitumen for mortar. They said, come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower whose top is in the heavens, and let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be dispersed over the face of the whole earth. And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the children of man had built. And the Lord said, behold, they are one people, they have all one language, and this is only the beginning of what they will do, and nothing that they propose to do will now be impossible for them. Come, let us go down again. Who do you think God's talking to with the let us? He's talking again to his divine counsel. Let us go down there, confuse their language, so that they may not understand one another's speech. So the Lord dispersed them from there over the face of all the earth, and they left off building the city. Therefore, its name is called Babel, because the Lord confused the language of all the earth, and from there the Lord dispersed them over the face of all the earth. A couple of things that I found in my study, that notice that they built a tower whose top was to the heavens and to the sky. Now, all my life, all my biblical life, I've been kind of taught they were trying to build a tower up to heaven, right? They were trying to access heaven. But the text doesn't say they were trying to access heaven. It was just building a tower whose top was in heaven. Their goal was to make a name to themselves. They didn't say, we're trying to get out of the earth and go up to the realm and hang out where God is. Actually, when you begin to study the text, and you study that time, that they would build towers that had the temples with these large towers. And these towers and temples were a way to get God to come down to them. When people who worship different and idol gods would build these temples in order to commune with and meet their God, it was a way to control the interaction and communication with the deity. And so what they're saying is, God, where was the command for man? Go throughout all the earth, fill and subdue it. But instead of doing that, they congregate in one place and determine we're going to make a tower and we're going to bring God down here to do our bidding in this place. God comes down, sees what's going on, and he disperses them throughout the land. He calls them to go out and do what we've been called to do in the first place. Go out into the land, fill it, subdue it. God continually gives this command to man that we don't follow it. Go into all the earth, fill it, subdue it, make it like Eden, make it reflect my glory. They got this command there. They didn't follow it because when they didn't follow it here, they come out of the boat, out of the flood. Noah's people get that same command, right? Go into all the land, fill it, subdue it. They don't follow it. God has to disperse them. Even New Testament, disciples. Go ye into all the nations and make disciples, right? Samaritan in the othermost parts of the world. They don't do that. They stay in one place. What does God have to do? He brings persecution. The reason that the first century apostles began to spread out is because persecution made them do that. I thought I would tag this to say, you better do what God tells you to do so God don't have to bring trouble in your life to get you to go where he wants you to be. Oftentimes we go where it's comfortable and where we want to be at versus where God is trying to send us to and to do what we're supposed to do. So God's got to bring some kind of judgment on us in order to put us in the place where he wants, because the plan was always go out into the earth. What Michael Heiser promotes in his book, and I agree, that remember in Psalm 82, where he talks about the dividing up of the nations, over in Deuteronomy 32, Psalms 82, this divine counsel. Deuteronomy 32 said when he divided the nation, this is when the nation was divided. He divided them according to the sons of God. Here is the argument and all of that I was saying is that when God, after this final fall, God in essence says, I'm through with y'all. Is that I'm no longer going to have direct interaction with you, that I'm going to appoint lesser members of my divine council to rule over each of these nations. But then I'm going to raise up a nation of my own whose job will be to take back to the original plan that I had. Let's go back to Deuteronomy 32, and I can get out of here. 8 and 9. When the Most High gave to the nations their inheritance, when he divided mankind, he fixed the borders of the people according to the numbers of the sons of God. But the Lord's portion is his people, Jacob, his allotted heritage. And so God says, all the other nations, you get these other entities that you're going to deal with, but Israel gets me. Ultimately, if you continue reading through the Deuteronomy, you'll find that the plan is always to bring them back in. But Psalms 82 tells us what ends up happening is that those divine beings that God gave the rule over the nations, first of all, did not rule those nations justly. And then secondly, they began to rule them as gods and to receive worship. It is the belief here that this is where all false gods and deities come from. So when you see the false gods of Egypt, you see Baal, all of these beings were spiritual beings who God did place to rule and to lead over nations, but instead of them staying faithful to God, they fall and want to rule the nations their own way and not as God would have them rule it. Did I say that in the way you can understand it? And so God's whole judgment now becomes on all of these nations and their rulers. So this goes to Ephesians 6, where the Bible says we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against rulers, against principalities, against powers. There are all terminology that means of people who have territory and have authority. Remember Daniel, when Daniel's praying, and we did our 21-day fast. That's the basis for the 21-day fast. And the angel comes and says, hey, the minute you started praying, I was sent. But the prince of Persia held me up. Who is this prince of Persia? Obviously, this spirit being who had rule over the region of Persia or Babylon. And Michael, who seems to be the archangel who fights for Israel, he comes and battles with the prince of Persia. And so I said to say that these false deities and gods that other people worship, first of all, they are real. They are real spiritual beings. I think that some of us don't give enough credit to idols or false gods. It's not that they don't have power. It's that their power is lesser than God's power. It's not that people don't have some interaction in some real type of experience with these other, I don't really want to use the term deities, but beings. And they obviously have some interaction with them. And if you even think about this, that when you see a lot of these stories and writings from these false religions, many of the stories are similar to our Bible stories with some different nuances. They change the good guys and the bad guys. They change who's the hero of the story, but many of the stories are similar and different. Some people use that as a way of trying to disprove Christianity and say that we copied our religion from these other stories. But the reality is that when we understand this concept, we understand why these other nations would have similar biblical stories. That why they all have stories about the fall in Babel, and they have virgin birth stories and these kind of things, because these same spiritual beings are still tied to the same. They just change again who's the hero of the story and who's ultimately the God over the story. So those things to me don't disprove Christianity, but go more so to enforce it. And I always tell people, if you're going to choose a side in the spiritual warfare, why you choose a losing side? All right. I think I successfully confused you enough tonight. Any questions? I see a hand here. Go ahead. Well, in an essence of I don't really know how to answer that question. I will say this: if they are a combination of angelic beings who are already in the image of God and humans that are in the image of God, it would seem plausible that they have that same imagery. But at the same time, they're a hybrid, an abomination, something that God ultimately destroys. So I would have to I would say yes, but then I would say I don't know. But we're looking at these giants, the Nephilim, they're a hybrid. They're a mixture between humans and angelic beings. And so both angelic beings and humans are made in the image of God. So by definition, I guess. But I wouldn't die on that hill. Because if somebody want to argue against me, I'm not going to stay on that hill. You know. Anyone else? Go ahead. Yes. Yes. Yeah. 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 So yes, and that's a point that that's also made in the book, that then are we saying that they were involved in creation? But so I'll just use the example that he uses in his book. So if I say to you, let us go get some pizza, and I go buy the pizza, we all had pizza, but I'm the one that paid for it. Right. You see what I'm saying? So again, so he is the only one. God is the only one who can create. But the fact of involving folk in his creation and them being there with him. In Job, when Job questioned God, and then God says to Job, well, where were you, right, when I created the cosmos and the morning stars, speaking of the angelic beings, began to sing or whatever. So he's telling them that these angelic beings were there when I created everything. They were there, but you weren't, when he's putting Job in his place. But there's some insight in that man, that these other angelic beings, this divine council, when he created, they were there. And so it's an inclusive language, but it doesn't mean that they were active in that. Most folk do point to that Trinitarian language in there, but when you see this, it's just that term Elohim is used over and over again in there. And what I was taught was that Elohim was plural for God and was an explanation of the Trinity. So when it says in, I think it's Deuteronomy 6:8, or is it 6:4, where it says, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God is one God." And so when the text is said, it's using a singular and a plural. So it speaks of God as being one, but also speaks of him as being plural. So that's a definite, point to the Trinity. In this case, it's not rendered in that same way. So it's talking to a council, but no, they had nothing to do with creating us, only God. Yes. Mm-hmm. So we all humans are the seed of the woman. God, He made it so that men have to be in women, birth through a woman, and all of that. So it is a messianic promise that ultimately Jesus is going to come through the lineage of mankind. So it's actually what we call the first messianic prophecy in the book, where that Jesus is going to be born through a woman, a human being is going to come and then ultimately defeat these rebel spiritual beings. Is going to deal them this blow. He's going to crush your head. It's going to bruise his heel when you go on to read the text. haven't heard that. I'd have to, you know, I would look into that. But I will say this: sometimes we're looking at symbolic language as literal language, and simply the seed is really, when you talk about seed, is what is the ability to reproduce or to make, and it's not a necessarily a physical thing. But how about we both look at it and we'll come back next week with something on it? All right. Anyone else? They playing that music. They playing that. It's after 8 o'clock Bishop music. Who told them to go play the music? All right, listen here. This is good stuff, and I'm still trying to. Let me tell you something. I'm doing what preachers won't do and tell you I don't know everything. I'm learning this as we going. All right, even with myself, and really been trying to inundate myself with it, and leery to answer some questions because again, some of this the Bible doesn't say, and you have to draw conclusions from extra biblical writings, and so so yeah, on there. But the points I'm trying to make is really to see that this fall. There was a fall in the heavens. There was a fall in the earth. God's whole plan of redemption is to bring us back to that. There's going to be a new heaven and a new earth. The new heaven and the new earth is to take us back to what God's design was in the first place, is beings that are loyal and submitted to him. Now, when it goes to, now here's the difference. There's a plan of redemption for us. There's no redemption for fallen spiritual beings. Those that are fallen, they done for. They don't get a second chance. Thank God. I forget second chance. I've been past that long time ago. All right. So we're getting ready to go again. If you want to give, do so electronically. And if you want to give, and you can put a basket out. Somebody wants to get to a basket, but I'm going to pray and we're going to go. First Lady, you want to add anything? Okay. Listen, we've been doing our fitness Saturdays. Only a few of y'all been coming, but I want to do something different this Saturday. And I want to get a consensus from I see a few of my Saturday crew here. I was thinking about we meet on the bridge that's over there by Ike Island. It's a bridge there, and it's good for people who want to walk and if people want to ride. It's a rest stop right before you go over to the other island. And if we meet there on the bridge Sunday, and we could back it up to 7 instead of 6, Saturday, I'm sorry, to 7 instead of 6 a.m. to help a little more people get out their bed and make it there. But it's going to get hotter quicker. And you can walk or ride. And it's nice because it's flat mostly. That's why I say going that way. And the scenery's better. You got the ocean right there to look at. What y'all think? You good with it? You good? That's good. Okay. I'm seeing my folk who normally come with the thumbs up, so we'll do that then. So what I'll do is I'll send out, I actually already got on Google and took pictures of the Google map and got a pen, and I'll send out that pen. So if you don't know how to get there, I'm going to send you a link. All you got to do is click on it and use your map on your phone, and it'll take you straight there, and we'll meet at 7. I suggest if you don't know how long it takes you to drive there from your place, just do it a day in advance and see how long it says it's going to get there. It'll take you to drive there from your house. And I get over there. I'm going to bike. Other folk might want to walk or ride. But for my beginner bikers, it's good because it's level. It's a nice wide deal with very little traffic out there. And you even can ride on the sidewalk. The sidewalk is big enough to ride on, but the shoulder in the street is wide also. All right. Father, we thank you for your word. We thank you again for this time together as we study your word. Lord, bring us clarity and understanding, even maybe where I might have obscured understanding. You, by your Spirit, bring the clarity of thought that you would have your people to have, Lord. Now, Father, as we leave this place, go with us, keep us, guide us, comfort us. In Jesus' name, amen.